Well, thank you very much for joining us in the second part of our discussion, in which we'll be talking more about what happens in the club licensing, and the two gentlemen in the studio are experts on that. But just before that, we'll give you some results. Koth Biro is going on now. The real meaning of Koth Biro is being seen now. The rains are here now. So Koth Biro means the rain is coming. The first runners-up, Leeds United and Githurai All-Stars, apparently were the latest teams to book their spaces to the round of 16. They played this afternoon. I assume they played in the rain. Leeds drew 2-2 with Githurai. So all of them go through the round of 16 because they each have 5 points. Now, other teams that have qualified for the round of 16, Ziwani All-Stars, Wendani All-Stars, Kingston, among others. What I love most about the Koth Biro tournament is also the names of the teams there. That's one. Great. So now, let's talk about the Eldoret Sevens, the rugby series. Now, this was the penultimate round of the 7 series. This was in Eldoret. It's called Tisap. Tisap just means 7 in the Nandi language. So, again, here it looks like there were some upsets in the beginning, Ken.
Yes, going into Eldoret, everybody was just looking at Cabras and KCB. Those were the favorites for this, but they both fell out at the quarterfinals, and we had a winner that we didn't expect, and this was Nondies. And Nondies went about their business very well. They beat Strathmore Leos in the final after drawing 7-all and going into extra time. Now, Cabras had lost in the quarterfinals to Mwamba, who went on to claim a 3rd position. This is really a first for Mwamba. We had Oilers, who we thought would do well, but they lost to Nondies in the semi-finals, and so we had Nondies and Strathmore in the finals, and there we go. And now we are into the last series, which is the Kabeberi Sevens this weekend, and we have Cabras leading KCB by a single point in the circuit. Strathmore is 3rd with 82, and those 3 have a mathematical chance of each winning, the overall title.
Well, I think it's very simple that KCB has to finish on top of, Cabras has to finish on top of KCB by whichever way if they're to win the series. Okay, yeah. Because Cabras had lost 21-14 to KCB. Now KCB had lost to Oilers before. There was Strathmore losing 17-12 to KCB, and Oilers being beaten by Mamba 12-7. So the finals will be at the Kabeberi Sevens, and there's promise of more than just the finals. There's promise of action. 16 teams are going to be there. There's promise of action on the field and promise of action off the field as well. So make your way there on Saturday and Sunday for the Kabeberi Memorial Sevens tournament. 16 top teams will battle it out there. Great. South Sudan, for that matter, have managed to qualify for the Olympics. The newest nation in Africa. Their first time at the Olympics. Sudan is going to represent Africa in basketball.
Imagine
now that is South Sudan. I have to say, South Sudan. That is big news.
South Sudan has never qualified for any event at the Olympics.
They're a new nation.
Now they've made this, and all this is courtesy of the efforts of one Luol Deng, who used to play, in the NBA, and he single-handedly really just financed this team that is made of refugees and their children. This is a nice story. This is a feel-good story.
You must say those people are classifying as refugees and their children are playing for NBA teams. Okay,
look, we need to make the feel-good story.
Yeah, but they are playing for NBA teams.
Yeah, so they beat Angola in their last game 101-78 to qualify to get the sole African slot at the Olympics that's going to be in Paris next year.
That's huge, isn't it?
That's huge.
What do you think?
That's massive.
Is that investment as well?
That's a good
Look,
story.
the bulk of these players actually play in very big clubs in the US. So they are playing with the top kind of science that you're talking about. Yeah.
Yes.
Is that...
No, that is huge. I mean, just the fact that they've qualified.
Yes.
And just what you're saying, that the financial support that they've been given, it's a good
massive, isn't it?
It is.
Congratulations to South Sudan. We wish you all the best. Represent Africa. We'll be right behind you, just like we were, even when you were looking for everything else. And Africa is proud of you. So we'll wait to see what you do in Paris in the Olympics. Gentlemen, let's get down to what we wanted to discuss. There is something called club licensing, and it is called exactly that. This club licensing, according to the fans out there, denied Gor Mahia a chance to play in the Champions League, something that has never happened. Sam Karanja is in the first instance board. He's the chair of the first instance board. Actually, that's a board that deals with club licensing. What is first instance? What is club licensing? How difficult is it to be licensed as a club?
Thanks, Bernard. First of all clubs that have to participate in the FKF, KPL league have to be licensed. So they qualify on a sporting merit. However, they have to earn a license. Now that licensing, and let me speak about club licensing. Club licensing is a pathway towards professionalizing football. It's a global trend. It started in 2012, driven by FIFA. We've only recently have had it in Africa. What it entails is clubs have to meet a criterion. There are certain set standards which have already been put, and there are 5 pillars. One of the pillars is what we call the sporting pillar, and I'll come back to them. There is infrastructure, there is administration and personnel, there is a legal, and there's a financial. Now, to put it in perspective, because you've asked about the Gor Mahia case.
Yes.
Gor Mahia had an issue on the financial pillar. There is what you call the overdue payables. Now, overdue payables is what you owe. So one of the criterion under the financial pillar is that you must not owe either your players, other clubs, or the licensor, who in this case is either CAF or FKF. In Gor's case, and perhaps football fans can recall this, they owed a couple of players. Three of them.
To be specific.
And therefore, for you to be able to qualify, you either must have paid these particular players, or you have an agreement with them, and failure to which you do not get a license. So what happened, the board, which I sit, we are 7 of us, looked through previously. We looked at the agreements, and we felt that everything was in order. Only later on, for one of the players to come back and complain to CAF and say, particularly Gor had not paid, had not kept their end of the promise. So there was an agreement, and therefore they fell behind in terms of payments.
There were 3 players, apparently, that Gor Mahia had not paid.
There were 3 players,
and
yes.
then later on, they actually said they paid 2 of the players within the deadline, but one of them, they couldn't find him because they could only find his agent. How did that affect their quest to try and make it to play in the Champions League?
I think it was very clear, and there was an explainer towards that. CAF did come back and say that you need to pay by a certain time. Now, when it comes to payments, you have to indicate, you have to show the remittance, not an order to pay. So the remittances had to come before the deadline. So CAF did give a 24-hour. We lobbied, and CAF provided 48 hours, by which time Gor must have paid. Now, you must understand also the draw was coming up, and therefore this was a last-minute situation, and therefore the payments had to be done in good time for Gor to be able to participate.
So, if I may ask, just for the purposes of so that the viewers and the fans can understand, did Gor Mahia pay in time, or were they time barred?
They were time barred.
They were time barred. So they didn't pay in time to be included in there. So it's not that they owe anyone at the moment. It's just that they were time barred to be included in that.
Bernard, any business, let's say it's a business, you will always owe someone.
Correct.
You will always...
wait. I have to laugh at that, because there was a story. It's not a story. You remember what the president commented on as well, and the climate said, there is a saying that you'd rather die of debt than die of poverty. So
So
you're saying it applies in sports as well.
and that's part of professionalizing, because we're looking at this, we're already talking about the business of sports.
Yes.
And therefore, club licensing is really to professionalize the sport. You're looking at these clubs not as philanthropy vehicles.
Yes. You're looking at them as professions.
As professionals.
Let me ask Patrick here, just to bring him in as well, because he runs a club, for real. Do you owe players?
No, we don't.
You pay them all on time?
Yes, we do.
So they're all paid up. There's no player who is owed any money at Nairobi City Stars? Did you have any time when you owed them any money?
Sometimes there are delays. Signatory is not in, accountant has an emergency, didn't show up in the office. So there are those a few days.
Okay.
But really we don't owe players money. Yeah.
But you know that there are clubs and many that owe players and many
That's
money.
for sure.
In
That's
back
the
pay,
reality.
in so many other things.
Yeah, that's the reality of our game. And hence the club licensing.
How does it affect the game itself? Because it must affect the game, Ken.
I'm just wondering, Bernard. See, we last year and the year before, we always have towards the tail end of the season. There are those teams that don't honor matches, and they don't honor simply because they don't have money.
They haven't paid the players.
We had a case where somebody came and said, "Hey, you know what? Me, the way I'm seeing the money I have now, I'd rather pay off the players what I owe them than start taking them for matches. Then I'll owe them more money which I can't pay."
Well, that was a team that was going down, but partly because they didn't have money. So
exactly.
How does it affect the teams?
Isn't that team then supposed to be deregistered or from this
Let's hear it from Patrick.
No, I think I'm best answering this because I run a club. And Bernard, the reality is you go in with all the good intentions that you're a good brand, you can draw in sponsors, and you always have that hope. So I signed Sam here. I know that he'll expect package X, but I can only give him Y. And I tell him, you know what, I'll give you your X, but you take this in the meantime. The moment this sponsor comes in, I will increase your package. So you dwell on hope. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of clubs are run. You sign players and you're like, we're chasing a few sponsors here and there. If the money comes in, you'll be happy.
But even the sponsorships,
however,
Patrick, I must say, even the sponsorships,
and then however it didn't happen.
The ones that we've had recently, especially from the companies that call themselves the betting companies, when you sign a deal, the deal is, the money is not usually on the table, is it?
No, it's not.
It's not.
Yeah.
So it's a projection.
It is. In some cases, yes. And I think this is what happens. When it comes to gaming firms, I think the ones that set foot in the country much earlier saw the money. And then there are all these undertakers who come many years after, and they hope that they'll get that same money that the initial ones got. So you associate with a team and hope that the followership of that team will all sign up on your platform.
Correct.
And
they are looking at the business aspect of
money.
it. They're looking at the business part of it.
And then reality hits you that, you know what, I think many years went by and that business is not the same anymore. So you realize that you thought that you'll get people onto your platform, put in bets so that you make money so that you can support this club.
And it didn't happen.
And then it didn't happen. So
Great.
you realize
Let's move to another pillar so that we can understand all. That's the financial pillar, and I think it's been understood very easily from where it goes wrong. What about the sporting pillar?
So the sporting pillar looks each year. The FIB looks at what is going to be mandatory, what is going to be obligatory, and what is best practice. So for this year, for example, for the FKF PL, on the sporting pillar, we looked at women's team. We looked at a youth team. And youth team is your under 10 all the way to the under 21s. The other one was to look at insurance.
So you look at whether a team has a women's team and a youth team.
Exactly.
And that becomes mandatory now. In simple terms, the teams in the FKF Premier League now must have a women's team and a youth team.
They must have, so under mandatory and obligatory, the youth team was a mandatory. What you mean by mandatory, it means that you can be kicked off. You may not get the license. Now, if it's obligatory, it means that you can get a license and a sanction, which is the case for FC Talanta. The other thing was to look at the welfare of the players. One of the things we're looking at is health insurance. And I'm happy to say most of the clubs had health insurance. Some clubs, such as his, had private health insurance. Most of them was NHIF. And you have to show proof that these players are covered. So that's a sporting pillar.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's sporting. We have the admin, and there was something ahead of the admin.
Personnel, infrastructure.
Yeah, so there is infrastructure.
Infrastructure, yes.
Yeah, infrastructure was, this time, very simple. Do you have a stadium that you play? Now, we know most of our clubs do not have the infrastructure. So the clubs had to state where they're going to be playing their games. Some of them do have their own. For example, the likes of Ulinzi, Police, they do have their own facilities, EABL, but some of them will be sharing. So if you look at Nyayo Stadium, if you look at Kasarani, if you look at some of the clubs in the counties, they do have agreements. So they had to show if you own a piece of infrastructure, either you had to submit a lease or even a title deed. Some of them did provide title deeds.
But let's look at it. Some of that infrastructure might not be used. I mean, if you are, say, a team that comes from up country and you have some land or even a stadium in the vicinity where you can train, it might not be able to host any Premier League matches.
So there is classes of matches, which there's some matches which require a lot of security, stewards, and therefore you're obligated to move those matches to the closest stadium. Right. But there are smaller matches where you can actually host them within your own stadium.
Okay, so you looked at that. Did you find that the Kenyan teams qualified to get a license on that? Probably not.
Well, we are starting. If you remember,
what we call moderating in the results. So they were at C, let's move them to B or something.
So licensing, unfortunately we lost with the ban. We lost a period where most of the countries were taking off. The other day, Ghana actually yesterday they released their results, the decision they made. They actually only licensed one club fully. The rest of them were sanctioned. The 17 clubs were sanctioned.
Really?
But speaking to the FIB in Ghana is because they've been doing this and therefore they were stricter. So for us, we came in, we said, you cannot beat up a child whom we've expelled. So bring everyone in and then start now monitoring. And remember, it's going to be a continuous.
Admin and personnel.
So here is interesting because here is where we look at the structure of the clubs.
Patrick is listening very intently. Are you sure you got everything together the way you wanted it? The way he's listening intently is like something that he missed.
Bernard, club licensing is tough.
Are you sure?
He will very tough.
He will tell you.
But you have a football ground where you train, don't you?
No, we do.
Yeah, okay.
But you see, what the FIB want to see is if you don't own it, if you don't have title deed, as he says, you have an agreement.
Okay, you need to have.
So if you say that you play home matches at Ruaraka, you need to provide an agreement with the owners of the ground that you're actually in agreement to use their facility for a certain period. If you say you train at Ligindogo, I must provide a letter from Ligindogo confirming that we have an agreement to be using their facilities over a certain period of time. If you don't, then you're sanctioned.
Obviously, this works for some teams better than others, because then if you choose your home ground, and I think Gor Mahia has now chosen Kisumu as its home ground, you know other teams will be dreading to go and play in Kisumu. I don't know.
But however,
not all the teams are that
but however,
not all of them want to play that far as well.
Exactly, but however, what Sam is saying is that whatever pitch that you pick to be your home ground or alternate ground, because there's home ground and alternate.
Correct.
You must provide agreements if you don't own them.
Yes.
If you own them, then you must show proof that you indeed own them.
Yeah.
That is just part of the club licensing.
Okay. Right. I'm rushing so that we get all the pillars and we get it correct. I think we've done legal. We left it with financial, which
So
you
we
almost put it in legal as well, but financial just means you must have money to pay the players.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the personnel administration is a human beings, the structure. So a club must have a number of staff members, some of them full-time. So for example, a CEO, and we must, for example, he's a CEO, they must provide a contract. We're looking at also having a financial officer. Now for this particular year, we said you can outsource that particular function. You need because
you can contract somebody to do it for you outside.
Exactly. Yes. Because what we'll be looking at in the financials is also you must have your audited reports. And remember, these are very critical. I know I'm touching a little bit on the financials, but because you want to draw in people, you want transparency, you want governance. And therefore, if you do have a financial officer, they'll be able, and they must be qualified. So you must show their qualifications, either a CPA, we know all those financial.
You need to put their qualifications,
And then you must have the technical. The technical bench with contracts. With contracts.
Do you stipulate how much you should be paying them? Because previously there was a contract from KPL to players that they should not be paid less than this. But that's when there was a broadcast sponsor.
For now, it's a contract. We need to see a term, whatever the amount is. It's very interesting, of course. Data is confidential. I may not talk about this, but we were happy to see that most of the clubs did have the contracts. And some of them were coming to an end, so we require them to actually
I'm rushing because I want to ask Patrick a very important question that I think is important in terms of this issue of sponsorship, which is a perennial problem in any country, but in other countries it looks like their problem is usually who should they pick out of the 5 they have who are equally good, who's giving them more value. But in our case, the first question is, how do we value our own clubs? What's the value of Nairobi City Stars? What's the value of Gor Mahia? What's the value of FC Leopards that you can take to a sponsor and say, this is the value of this team, this is what it brings to you if you sponsor them? Because we don't seem to be able to attract sponsors.
You know, that's a very good question, and I'll answer it in a very simple way. One, valuation comes down to what that entity brings in terms of income. So if you want to value Club X, you look at certain parameters, and that's what happens the world over. One, what does that club bring in? Get tickets. How much revenue do you bring in a season? For Kenyan clubs, negligible, unless you're hosting Gor or FC Leopards. But that was back in the days. Right now, depending on the performance, you'll find that you get nothing out of that. Two, how do you spin off your merchandise? Do you sell merchandise? Does it earn you revenue? Now, we all know that for Kenyan clubs, that doesn't happen. Today, you'll have very expensive kit, replicas at 5,000 bob. Tomorrow, you'll find them in River Road at 500 bob. And no one is buying your merchandise. Yep. So you don't make money out of that. Thirdly, what is your attraction in terms of sponsorship? Do you get sponsorship at the end? I mean, every season. So you don't. So Bernard, no get tickets. You don't sell merchandise. You don't attract sponsorship. What is your value? You have no value. So it actually comes down that, Bernard, you find that a typical Kenyan club, the only value that you have is the slot that you occupy in the league that you play in. So I tell you I'm a Premier League club. So you want to buy me out? I have no valuation because there's no other way of valuing that club. I don't have assets, I don't have land.
Oh, this is a cyclical problem.
I have a bus, but let me just finish. So I have a bus.
Because
I have
you
a bus,
need money
but
to
the bus
be
is
able
not
to
an
get
asset,
to do what you're saying.
Exactly.
But then again, you don't have the money to do it, so you can't value yourself enough to sell yourself to somebody else. So if we were to start, assuming we are starting afresh, 100% afresh in the Premier League, we are all new teams.
Yes.
It's a new country like South Sudan, and we want to start the league. What would be the first thing that we have to do to be able to attract sponsorship, to be able to attract big money into the league?
So let me answer you on that one. Value. You have to build a value. So you build a brand, and those three aspects that I've talked about, merchandise, get tickets, and that ability to attract sponsors, is what will give you a good value. However, we don't have any of that. So what else can you present? Now you'll have to go to the media. Now, how much space do you occupy in the media? On radio, on TV, on print. So if today I get a newspaper and I flip the back pages, do I see City Stars? Yes. Now the space that City Stars has occupied, now replace that space with a red card. So that gives you what is called an advertising value equivalent. Now that is the only thing that you can sell. I'll give you an example of 2011. There's a firm that did a valuation of the Kenyan Premier League. And the Kenyan Premier League was valued at 686 million.
The
Kenyan Premier League.
Okay.
So the league itself and the 16 teams therein, yes. It was 686 million. Gor Mahia alone had a valuation of 200 million. So Gor, the performance, then the news all the time, the photo at the back there is Gor, the story about Gor. Tusker and FC Leopards were at 155 million. Now, so what does that tell you? So you don't have get tickets, you don't sell merchandise, you don't have sponsorship. So now you go to your AVE and you tell us a would-be sponsor, you know what? This is my AVE. Now what that means is that clubs need to start working with monitoring firms so that they value you in terms of AVE and they give you a value. Now you carry that valuation, and now you go to Sam and tell Sam, you know what? In 2023, my AVE as City Stars was 150 million. Now, for you to get a premium sponsorship for City Stars, where you take all the properties, I only need 60 million. But my return will be 150 million.
You're saying that even in how you present yourself as a team to a sponsor, it has to be scientific. That's what you're saying. Because
that's what I'm saying.
Ordinarily, how we present ourselves is we are Gor Mahia, we are FC Leopards. Look at all our fans, how many they are. Look
exactly.
At this town is already green, this town is blue, and that is it.
So let me just add this.
I think
so. There's a science
it's
behind
a
it.
mindset. We've had this notion that sponsors are philanthropists. It's a business.
They were before.
It's a business. It's a commercial transaction. And therefore, sponsors are looking at return on investment. If I put in X amount of money, I need to get this back. And remember also, they are asked to spend more. So for example, I pay you this amount of money. You're not just going to use it for your fuel, for your salaries. I also want to see value. Are you going to do some of my CSR? What the visibility is talking about? All those things are actually measured by sponsors, and sponsors are obviously to win, because you need to draw in. You need to draw in the funds. You need to draw in what they call eyeballs, and that's why you will see people sitting down and saying that we require someone to measure this. And that's why we're saying, in terms of, you asked the question, if this was to start today, I think there are 3 pillars we need to start with. One is a personnel, because the people, for example, I'll tell you, one of the things we required was a marketing officer and a digital officer. Okay. What does that do? It means there's someone full-time who looks at the brand, if it's Tusker, if it's City Stars, if it's Gor Mahia. So by the time they're going to seek for sponsorship, there's someone who actually can put this together and actually put in a compelling case for them. The other one is infrastructure. Obviously, we need to do a lot in terms of infrastructure. We are so many years behind, you know, about our stadia, and then obviously the sporting bit of it, because that's where the talent, grassroots. How do you get the youth teams, the under 21s, under 14? Those are the 3 things I would say, if you're to be asked today, if God was to come and say, today, what you only have 3 days.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. We've got less than 1 minute. Patrick, yes. I want to ask you a question. There is this notion in the fans' mind that the institutions that are sponsoring institutional clubs shouldn't have clubs within themselves, but they should sponsor community clubs. What's your thought? Just a quick one. We've got 1 minute.
There's a merit in that.
There's a merit in it.
Yeah, there's a merit in that, because community clubs draw in the numbers, and you can use those numbers to build your value.
Okay.
So there is, look at the example, Shabana. When Shabana is playing, it's a standstill in Kisii Town. So how do you capitalize on that? So if they get support, it means they can build on the numbers better and give value back to the sponsor. Yes.
So gentlemen, Ken, one last word. Do you think that Kenya is on the path to this club licensing and to greater things in sports?
Yes, it is. We are into greater things, and Azam TV could not have come at a better time. This is
That's
the
what you
time
think.
for it.
Okay. Yeah. What about you, Patrick? Just one last word then. On all what we have talked about, club licensing, Kenyan football, are we in the right direction?
Exactly, we are. And I just like to add on what he's saying. We've missed that bit, that final piece of the jigsaw that can give you value. TV gives you value. Players play better. And that means if you associate with a partner, they get the visibility.
Okay.
They get the recognition.
The players get
the
the exposure.
Exactly.
Sam, that was a very concise kind of discussion on what happens in club licensing. Are we there? Are we almost there?
I'm happy we're talking about club licensing, because for a long time we've been talking at the top. We're talking about the federation, but we've forgotten the foundation, the administrators, the professionalization. Once we address that, then the rest will fall into place.
Thank you very much. Sam Karanja, the chair of the first instance board that does club licensing, and Patrick Correa, the CEO of Nairobi City Stars. That was quite an insightful talk on what happens in club licensing and in football as well. And we hope that that's going to get Kenya to greater heights in football. We changed our format today just to accommodate this long talk, and we are glad that you stayed with us all through. We'll have another talk next week on more on sports from the Scoreboard. I'm Bernardo Tieno. Thank you very much for watching, and good night for now.